we've concluded that the conditions are not met to reopen elementary schools in the Montreal region.
The growth curve has successfully been flattened in most of Alberta.
We cannot let our guard down now. We must watch the trends like a hawk.
We have to continue to take it slow. This weekend, less travel is incredibly important.
There is quite a bit of work to do in the space of vaccine creation and then production, but that is certainly something that we're working on.
Hello, I'm Mercedes Stephenson, and this is the West Block.
And it's because of Manitobans that we've been able to begin to slowly and to carefully restart our economy.
We're getting thousands of people back to work. We've laid a solid foundation for economic reopening and recovery. We have the framework.
A crucial element that would help us to reopen is for the majority of people to start wearing a mask in.
We just heard from 3 of Canada's premiers in Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec about how their provinces are going about reopening. Ontario has taken a slower approach than some, with a limited number of businesses that will be reopening on Tuesday. But if you are looking for a haircut, a manicure, or a massage, you're going to have to wait. And as for those restrictions on gatherings of numbers of people, you still can't have more than 5 in one place here in Ontario. Joining me now to discuss all of this is the person who's been the driving force behind much of the closure and subsequent reopening plans, Ontario's Finance Minister Rod Phillips. Welcome to the show, Minister.
Mercedes, it's great to see you.
You too, Minister. You've taken a very cautious approach in terms of the reopening. It's slower than a lot of other provinces. You don't have dates attached to it. Why have you chosen that particular approach?
Mercedes, when we first started to shut down things, we knew that at some point an even more difficult task was going to be reopening them. And so 3 weeks ago, we laid out a framework, and we said at the time that that framework was a roadmap, not the schedule. And a lot of people at that time were saying, well, where are the dates? And we said these dates will be tied to achieving certain public health metrics. We need to make sure that we have the capacity in place in our hospitals. We make sure we have the tracking and the testing. But very importantly, we need to make sure that the cases are coming down. And so that's why this week we were able to, with that framework in mind, tell Ontarians that on Tuesday, we're going to start to open up the economy. Another part of the framework was that there will be 3 to 4 week slots between that space. And that again was informed by the health and science professional who said the gestation period for this virus is 2 weeks. So we need at least 2 weeks to judge the impacts of what we've done in terms of reopening. So it was part of the plan that we laid out. We've also laid out, in this case, 95 different guidelines for the businesses that are going to be opening so they can do it safely. And this is really about 2 things. It's about making sure that we can do this in the way that's safe. We know that's important. But secondly, we need to make sure that there's confidence from the public, from employees, from employers. And that's why the guidelines are so important. And that's why we think doing this in a way that makes it least likely that we're going to have to go back and shut things down again makes sense.
So who will make the final decision on when the full reopening happens? Is it the Premier, is it Cabinet, or is it the health officials?
Well, all of it comes from the advice from our health professionals, in particular the chief medical officer. But it's our job to put the plan in place, which is what we did with that framework and now with this first stage of relaunching. So the cabinet, of course, has to consider all the factors, the economic impacts, the health impacts, the mental health impacts that are considerable on people. But we, at the end of the day, do that based on the best health and science advice. And we've been able to do that. And frankly, we've been able to say, our chief medical officer said that, we had planked the curve. Now we've been able to do that because that has had the confidence of the 14.5 million Ontarians who've done the hard work. First of all, our frontline workers, but also the people who've had to stay home, those who've had to shut their businesses. So we need to maintain that confidence and then finally move in a sensible process, to a full reopening. But we're going to do that according to the health and science advice.
Your government has spent $17 billion so far fighting this pandemic. Do you have a sense of how much more you might have to spend and how much this will have cost the Ontario economy at the end of the day?
Unlike other governments in Canada, we did recalibrate. We were on track, like everyone else, to present a budget in March that would have reflected the old reality. In relatively short order, I produced a one-year financial plan, essentially a short-term one-year budget that did talk about the impacts in terms of revenue, a $6 billion loss, and of course the investments that you talked about, $17 billion in support for healthcare and otherwise. Since then, the economy has deteriorated. We're quite evidently dealing with the worst economic situation, not just in Canada, but globally in our lifetime. So I'll update that on a quarterly basis. We just thought it was important that people understand to the greatest extent we could what we were doing to support the economy and people and healthcare, but also that we be transparent. So we'll do that again. I think it's in August. I do quarterly updates, and we'll be clear then where we see the economy going and where that impacts the provincial finances.
1.1 million Ontarians have lost their jobs as a result of this pandemic. Another 1.1 million on top of that have seen severely reduced hours. How do you go about getting that number of people, over 2 million, back into the workforce at full-time hours?
Well, it starts with where this all started, with a global health crisis. We know that if we do not deal with the health issue to the very best of our ability, then people aren't going to have the confidence to return back to work. We've had the opportunity to look closely at what has happened in other jurisdictions. And what we know around the world in other jurisdictions is people don't come back to work, customers don't come back as quickly as some people might think they would. And of course, that's because people are concerned about the health situation. That's why we put our health response at the front end of this. And that's why we set up the framework that was based on those health criteria that I talked about. However, as we see the curve flattening and as we see our own ability to operate with COVID improving, because we've been learning throughout this process, then people will come back to work. Jobs will return. And we will be able to start to see some of those people, as the Premier mentioned in your clip, tens of thousands more people will be working this coming week than were the last week, because we've been able to, in a limited basis, open the economy. But it'll be one step at a time. And I have so much confidence in the people of Ontario and frankly in Canada to come through this. But we have to understand that the COVID has not gone away. That's why we have to make sure we maintain the capacity in our health system, the testing, the tracking. And we have to understand that people are understandably concerned, having heard about all the devastating impacts of this, in terms of coming back. And we have to continue to do things that inspire their confidence.
We just have a few moments left, Minister, but do you have a sense of how many Ontario businesses will not survive this pandemic?
We don't, but it is the thing that I think about, and I know our Premier thinks about every day. It is, businesses, and particularly smaller businesses, are so important to our economy, and of course, they're so important to the families and individuals that they support. So we are doing what we can do to support them. We're trying to, again, make sure that their customers feel safe and their employees feel safe coming back, that we give them the guidance they need to run their businesses, and then we will just work through this a step at a time. None of us have had to turn on an economy before, so we're learning through this together. But I do have ultimately a lot of confidence in the resilience of Ontario business people and just Ontarians in general to come through this.
Okay, Minister, certainly lots to think about and talk about going ahead. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mercedes.
Up next, the May long weekend, the official or semi-official at least start of summer, heading out to the cottage on the agenda for lots of people most years, but not this year. We'll hear from cottage country on the impact of the pandemic on those communities.